the Jazz Notes podcast. I'm Ben Anderson.
I'm Chandler Holt.
It is February 18th. What happened?
I know.
It was January 29th for 14 straight days, and now we are on to the second half of the NBA season. That's crazy. It is going to wrap up quickly. These last 30 games can be a little bit of a slog, but they go quick because there is some actually big picture NBA basketball. And I do think you and I need to admit, you and I are just big NBA sickos. Like, we're just basketball fans. So, the Jazz season, whatever. But I'm excited for these last 30 games of the season because, like, guys are playing, guys are healthy, there's good games every night. The playoff push is real. So I'm excited for the second half of the season. I understand Jazz fans who are like, let's just get to the lottery and then let's get to the drafts. I don't blame you. But if you're an NBA fan or you're trying to figure out, like, what to root for, the NBA is fun, man. The All-Star game was a joke.
It was terrible.
But we get to good games. Like tomorrow, the Lakers are playing. There's a very short All-Star break because of the LA wildfires, unfortunately. But games start tomorrow, and then we're off to the races until June. It's crazy. It really doesn't really slow down at all. All right, as always, find me on Twitter at Ben's Hoops. Find Chandler at Holt Sports. Read us at KSLSports.com. We're going to go over the weekly news. We're going to go over the week that was for the Jazz, the week that's coming up for the Jazz as they return from the All-Star break. And then in the second half of the show, we will get your mailbag questions. We'll talk about standings as well in there. So, all right, where do we start?
Let's start with the weekly news. Quickly touch on Keontae George at All-Star Weekend. He was in the Rising Stars Challenge. Played, honestly, really good in that first game to 40 in the Rising Stars. He had 10 points, 3 for 5 from the field, 2 for 4 from 3 in the championship. He only had 3 points, but that was the game-winning shot, those 3 points were. And then also had 2 rebounds, 2 assists, steal, block. And then he ended up, because of that, got a ticket to the All-Star game. I don't know. A lot of NBA players had their opinions on how Rising Stars in the All-Star game was. And all in all, I was not a big fan of the tournament. It was more competitive, but I believe I saw a stat. It was like 40 minutes of the 3-hour program was basketball.
Which usually it's 48.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's way far off, but yes, there was just not enough basketball.
Yeah.
It was that simple. My theory is they just kept hedging their bets on thinking like, well, if this doesn't work, we'll fall. If the games don't work, we'll fall back to Kevin Hart. And if Kevin Hart doesn't work, we'll fall back to Mr. Beast.
Yep.
And if Mr. Beast doesn't work, we'll fall back to the ability to go and honor Kenny and Shaq and Charles and Ernie. And like, just guys, we're basketball fans.
Yeah.
Highlight the basketball. It's like that's kind of what I think has been lost about the All-Star game. It's like, yes, sometimes it's not always good, but we like watching the ball move from one side of the court to the other, and then sometimes a guy dunks and sometimes a guy shoots a three.
Yeah.
It's what we want to watch. And the All-Star game's not going to be competitive. It's not going to be good. I don't know how to fix it. I don't really care. Maybe you blend a little bit of what we've done, which is the Keontae game actually in the All-Star game was good because the veterans did not want to lose to the young guys.
Yes.
So maybe you take the All-Star game, normal rosters, and you just split them up by the oldest guys on the roster versus the youngest guys on the roster, because inevitably then you're going to get Wemby and Shea and Ant playing against LeBron and Steph and KD. And guess what? I actually do want to see that.
Yeah.
Great. There's your solution. Like, no draft. You just find the middle player by age, and everyone older than him goes on one team, and him and everyone younger goes on the other.
Yeah.
And it's that simple. And if that means you end up with a 33-year-old on the young team, fine. But you've got a bunch of good 38-year-olds in the NBA right now. I don't know what to tell you. But, yeah, then maybe you just split it up that way, because I do think one of the things the NBA was doing with the Rising Stars Challenge is trying to introduce fans to the next wave of players once LeBron leaves, which is somewhat imminent. You know, if it's not this season, it's next year. So who's going to be the next guy? And then, unfortunately, Ant didn't play, and Wemby played like 4 minutes.
Yep.
So that's where the failure was. But otherwise, if you're a Jazz fan and you wanted to watch Keontae, like if you were a 12-year-old, which is who these games are for, and you wanted to see Keontae play, you got way more of him than you expected.
Definitely.
So I thought from a Jazz perspective, I thought it was pretty successful.
We can move on from that. I don't want to talk about that too much.
I never want to talk about the All-Star game until this time next year.
Our last episode, there was 3 games after, then we got into All-Star Weekend, so we can talk about those games really quick.
Let's do it.
Started with Luka's debut, lost to the Lakers in LA 132-113. Jazz returned home, Lakers followed them, and they actually beat them on their home court 131-119. And then right before All-Star Weekend, an overtime loss to the Clippers 120-116.
The Clippers game was dicey there for a minute. It looked like the Jazz were going to steal a win again on back-to-back nights over the LA teams who were just like looking forward to the All-Star break. But credit James Harden, who played 49 minutes in that game, including the entire second half and OT, to win that game for the Clippers. That was a good game, man. If you bought a ticket to that game or you went to that game or you just sat down and watched it, you got your money's worth, your time's worth. So that was fun. I don't know what to make of the Lakers games.
Yeah.
The Jazz go and play in the bright lights of L.A. at Crypto Arena in Luka's debut, and they looked scared to be there, in my opinion. And then I don't know if the Lakers are terrible or if the Lakers couldn't wait to go on All-Star break, or if it was a team that had only played 2 games together, or if it was that you were playing the same team on back-to-back nights, essentially, or just all of it combined. But the Lakers looked awful.
Terrible.
Like, awful. And I've seen bad teams come in here. I was really unimpressed with the Suns when they needed Grayson Allen to hit 2 big threes in the final 4 seconds to beat the Jazz. I wasn't that impressed with the Clippers. Now they didn't have Kawhi, but I've seen quote-unquote good teams not play that well. Denver needed needed Westbrook and Jokic to have triple doubles, including a 30-20-10 performance from Jokic, and they played the whole game to beat the Jazz. I've seen unimpressive performances all year. That Lakers performance in Salt Lake was shocking.
The thing that stuck out to me, the Jazz won the turnover battle. Might be the first time this year. I know that's actually true, but
right.
And then going back to how the Clippers game was scary, the Jazz really put their lottery hat on at the right time. 21 total points in the fourth quarter and overtime combined.
Yeah, they were up 20 in the first half.
Yes.
I was doing radio pre-half and post, and I was thinking, they hit 16 threes in the first half. They're going to accidentally win this game. And that's what you're going to look at the rest of the year.
Yep.
And I hate to overemphasize that and think about it too much, but really the losses now are going to matter because the tanking teams are really tanking, and the winning teams are trying to win. So if you accidentally beat a winning team, that's going to be tough, which should segue us into what's coming up this week for the Jazz.
Yeah, next week, you spoke about how some of that, the LA teams have a shorter All-Star weekend. I'm pretty sure the Jazz have their regular size break because their next game is hosting Oklahoma City on Friday and then a back-to-back hosting Houston on Saturday.
Yeah, usually the league has 1 or 2 games on Thursday on TNT just to welcome everything back, and then the whole league plays Friday, but there's more than that. Wednesday and Thursday, and now Friday, the Jazz are back in action. Back-to-back to start, very tough. Home against OKC. Jazz's next 7 home games. Next 7 games are at home, I should say. They start with OKC. They start with Houston. Tough games there. I would project back-to-back losses there. Houston's not playing well, actually. They were on fire to start the year. They lost, I think, 6 in a row at one point, 2 weeks ago. They stopped the bleeding with a win and then lost their last game, I think, before the All-Star break as well. So before we just focus on these 2 games, let's look at the next 7 games the homestand the Jazz have. I just think that's interesting because it may dictate their season.
Yeah.
OKC, Houston, home against Portland, home against Sacramento, home against Minnesota, home against New Orleans, home against Detroit. That 5-game stretch after these first 2, Portland, Sacramento, Minnesota, New Orleans, Detroit, if you go 3-2 in that stretch, you're up to 16 wins. You're going to accidentally win games the rest of the year, and you might actually get to 20. I predicted a month ago, maybe at this point. I can't remember the 41. When we were 41 games in the season, I think I projected the Jazz were going to win 6 more games total, and they were sitting at 12. So I still think they're going to fall below 20, but that 5-game stretch is really going to be important. Portland is playing better. Sacramento is still only 5-5 in their last 10, but they have been better since firing Mike Brown. They did make a win-now trade a little bit, though they lost De'Aaron Fox. They brought in Zach LaVine. We'll see if they start to kind of find their bearings a little bit. Minnesota is going to be playing really hard. They want to get out of the play-in tournament. New Orleans doesn't want to win. Detroit does want to win. But it's dicey. The Jazz blew out Detroit by 40 earlier this year. At least they were up 40 in the first half. So that's what I'm really curious about. And then if you end up with only 1 win in the next 7, I think you're really well set up the rest of the year.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, of course, the most important game of this home stretch is that home against New Orleans. Because right now we can segue this into a
standings update.
Right now the Jazz are 13-41, 14th in the West, 28th overall. Half a game back from the Pelicans, but they have the same amount of wins. And as you said, that is all that matters at this point because all these teams are going to be losing. Washington at 9 wins, Pelicans and Charlotte and the Jazz all at 13 wins. We can look at sort of the upcoming week of games for all those teams. Washington hosts the Milwaukee Bucks and then plays in Orlando. The Pelicans are in Dallas and then host San Antonio. And then Charlotte, 3 road games in a row in LA, in Denver, in Portland.
So let's do the Jazz first. Do the Jazz win either of these next 2 games?
I think 0-2 in the next week for sure.
I think you lose to OKC and then you lose to Houston on back-to-back nights. Washington home against Milwaukee at Orlando. I think they lose both of those games. Again, Washington's just at that point where we may not even need to worry about them. The Pelicans at Dallas, home against San Antonio. probably losses. Charlotte, at LA, at Denver, at Portland, all losses.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of losses from these tanking teams. But that's what you got to start to expect. Like, the wins are going to become very rare.
Yes.
From here on out. So the Jazz winning a couple of games here in this next 7-game home stretch would be, I don't want to say the word catastrophic, but important or critical to their lottery odds, which they're going to need luck anyways, as we've said. You know, you've only got a 50% chance, even if you finish in the bottom 4, of drafting in the top 4. So you need to have some luck.
Yeah, so let's say this really quick. I do agree with you. I think that the Wizards are already basically guaranteed to have the worst record in the association.
Yep.
But the 3 worst records all get top odds in the NBA draft.
Yep.
So for Jazz fans who are tuned in to the lottery odds and want the Jazz to have the best odds possible, it's basically a 3-man race for 2 spots.
Yeah, that's what you're hoping for.
Yes.
Now, the nice thing is the 4th seed, it's like 4 percentage points lower.
Yes.
You go from a 52% chance of drafting top 4, I think, down to 48. So it's not crazy. It's still basically a coin flip. But again, the problem is at 4, you could drop all the way to 9.
Yes.
You're not likely to drop all the way to 9, but you're certainly not more likely to draft in the top 5 or the top 6. And not to get too far ahead of us, but like, you know, you want Cooper Flagg at 1. You want Dylan Harper at 2. You probably want Ace Bailey at 3. 4 and 5 in the draft, you're looking at VJ Edgecombe and Kasparis Yakashonis, who are like really good consolation prizes. Like, I actually think there's a chance that VJ Edgecombe, like if 5 years from now, we're like, he's the Dwayne Wade of that draft. Like, there was the obvious number 1 guy in LeBron, but the second best player wasn't Dylan Harper or Ace Bailey. It was actually VJ Edgecombe. Like, that wouldn't be crazy to me because rarely are the best 3 players drafted 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
VJ he's special, man. He's really good. So I'm excited to see what happens there. But once you get down to like 7, 8, and you're looking at like these other Duke guys, I think it gets pretty hairy.
Yeah.
So if you're in the top 5, I think you're golden. You start to fall outside of that, you're in a little bit of trouble. So make sure you're in the top 5.
Yes.
I think you feel pretty good about yourself. All right, should we take a break?
Yeah, let's take a break.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will get to your mailbag questions. Stick around. More Jazz Notes coming up next. Welcome back to the Jazz Notes podcast. Ben Anderson, Chandler Holt. As always, find us on Twitter, Ben's Hoops, or Blue Sky, Ben's Hoops. Same with Chandler, at C Holt Sports on both Twitter and Blue Sky. And then read us at KSLSports.com. All right, I apologize to the Blue Sky listeners. I just put the message out wrong. Late. Not wrong, but late. And so if that's where you are and you didn't respond, that was absolutely stupidity on my part. I've been a little busy doing radio stuff. So I apologize, but we did get some Twitter responses. And you have a question.
Yes, I do. I'm going to add my own mailbag question to the pod.
You got to tweet it. You got to tweet at me.
So say we were just talking about lottery odds and where the Jazz can fall depending on where they are. Say the Jazz get somewhere between 5 and 8 for their draft pick. Do you think there's any chance they package that pick and other assets, whether it be more draft picks or maybe something else, to move up a few spots? Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, this is the Darren Williams situation, which is before your time a little bit, but I was in Utah. Yeah, the Jazz had their horrible season. Everyone was looking at like Marvin Williams, Andrew Bogut, you know what I mean, who was going to be the number 1 overall pick and where the Jazz were going to fall. And I think they had the 2nd worst odds or 3rd worst odds, and they dropped to 6th. Yeah. I think it was a disaster, honestly. Like, the lottery totally broke against them when there was a clear, like, Bogut was the number 1, Marvin Williams was 2. You wanted one of the 2 point guards, Chris Paul or Darren Williams, and then it was like Ray Felton, who was fine, but like he was a distant 3rd in the point guard conversation. And then Martell Webster ended up going 6th, and the Jazz moved 2 other first-round picks to go from 6 to jump up to 3.
Okay.
And they drafted D. Will. So that's the Darren Williams situation. Yes, you want that. It's harder to do that than ever before.
True.
It's really harder now. Teams are not as willing to drop back 3 spots at the top of the lottery. But yeah, you know what? This is the value of having like the future Phoenix Suns 31 unprotected pick. Like, yeah, it's a lot of draft capital, but if you remember, you only gave up like 3 late firsts. It's basically the same trade that you did for Darren Williams. I think they ended up giving like 21 and 28, and it was like these 2 foreign guys who never played. It was a bad trade for Portland historically. But yeah, maybe you do. Let's say Toronto is up there, or like a team that Philly, I guess maybe could be in this conversation where they're like, man, we need to win now. Jazz have some win now dudes. What if they gave us one of their win now guys and the 6th pick, and we give them the 3rd pick, and then we get more draft capital down the line? Now, Philly actually has taken care of their draft capital pretty well, but like Charlotte, let's say Charlotte jumps up to 3 and is like, okay, maybe we're willing to drop back, or Chicago, but These teams are all bad. That's the hard part. These teams are all bad. Jazz are actually the team conceptually that should be most willing to move back because they already have a lot of talent on their roster, but we know that's not the case either. So it gets tricky.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. If you're at 6 and you just are saying like it's Ace Bailey or bust, you have to get him, and the Spurs are sitting there at 3 and are willing to drop back to 5 and say, well, we love VJ Edgecombe, or because now they have their point guard of the future and they don't need Kasparas Siakam. I don't know. I'm just trying to toy with the hypotheticals off the top of my head here. It gets tricky there. But maybe a team just doesn't need the guy at 3 and wants to drop back to 5. It's probably more likely the opposite of the Spurs. A team who needs a point guard is willing to drop back to 5. And does anyone need a point guard? Philly has one.
Maybe the Charlotte Hornets, LaMelo.
If they want to get rid of LaMelo, maybe they're moving off of him. Maybe they say like, hey, yeah, we'll get the guy of the future there. Brooklyn could use a point guard. Right? I'm trying to all these bad teams. Anyway, okay. But you understand the theory. Yes, I think it's possible.
Okay, now we can get into the actual replies. First up from Jimbo Slice. This tank is hard to watch. Why do you believe Jazz fans keep showing up to games? His hunch is the delicious and inexpensive hot dogs.
Jazz games rule in person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to tell you. Like, and Jimbo, like, I get it. Like, watching games and they're down by 15 and they're not trying to win. Like, I get it. It's a little exhausting. Go to a game, man. They are so fun. Basketball games are super fun, and I'm covering games, so it's a little bit of a different experience for me. But like, man, I've gone to a couple of hockey games just as a fan. It's just fun to be out and around people, and you want your team to win. And yeah, you get some drinks and you get some food and you get some candy, and the kids are having a good time. And inevitably, I've said this a million times in my career, but inevitably, at some point in the third quarter, the Jazz like cut a 20-point deficit to 10 or cut a 10-point lead to 1, and the fans go crazy. And all of a sudden, you're a part of something that only exists in sports.
Yep.
And the Jazz do that, and then they have 15,000 people in the stands because Jazz fans are diehards. We have a diehard fan base that does not have a lot else to root for during this stretch. We don't have a lot of other interest in our state. You know, you can ski all day and you can still go to the Jazz game at night. So, like, the other things you might be doing don't overlap with what the Jazz are doing, and they're beloved here. So that would be my answer, Jimbo, and your tweets. Jimbo's famously bizarre tweets are the reason people still love the Jazz. So he's a part of this. So I blame him. And yeah, $2 hot dogs, $2 nachos, $2 popcorn, $2 drinks. I think is what I can't remember what all of them are, but pretty good deal. I think it's water. But yeah, it's pretty good.
Next up from Stephen Ritter, thoughts on the open roster spot?
The people I have talked to said it was a little bit in flux, how they were going to do it. I suspect they are going to audition 10-day guys.
Okay.
But you might as well.
Yeah.
You've got no reason not to. Not that they don't have a lack of young players on the roster already, but you can do favors. You know, you can do favors to agents by bringing up guys. You can audition guys. Remember, Chris Dunn came in on a 10-day, and they ended up getting a second-round draft pick out of him in the trade. Am I right? It was a swap, I think is what they ended up doing. They took some money back. So, there's no reason not to do that. Now, you know, if you're Elijah Harkless, you're like, no, just play me. Yeah. Or you're Michael Potter, you're like, just play me. Don't bring up another guy. Let me play. But it's an audition spot. So I think that's what they will do. Or maybe they just leave it open. But I suspect there will be some 10 days. And look, as you get into the real deep cuts here of these rosters, when the Jazz are not playing Lowry or John or Walker or Jordan or Colin, you're just going to want some extra bodies. And then you're going to be relying on 10-day guys, and that's an easy way to lose games as well.
Yes. Next up from J. Brandon Olson, if KJ is getting minutes, who is he taking them from?
Well, he's a front court player, which is actually nice because, you know, you've been like starting Michael Potter, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And Mike is a nice guy, and I actually think might be an NBA player. Like, he might stick around, but as far as kind of the role or the minutes that he might step in, like, you know, Michael Potter the other night, I think it was Wednesday or it was Thursday. He played at the Stars in the morning. He played at the Jazz that night. Like, that's crazy. You don't need to do that. Yeah. So, yeah, probably Michael Potter would be the minutes I'm most expecting, and then you're just going to see less and less of John Collins and Lowry down the stretch. So he plays some 3. He plays some 4. I don't think he, like, takes Bryce's minutes. Maybe Johnny Juzang a little bit, but yeah, he'll get out there. I don't know how much he's going to play, period. Maybe he just looks terrible in practice, and the Jazz like, oof, no, not a chance here.
Yeah.
But as I said, like, he's going to look pretty cool running the break with Isaiah Collier and being super athletic and fast. And you might as well see what you have. Again,
definitely.
That, like, if you're talking about auditioning 10 days, you just audition KJ for the next 30 games and see what he can do.
Next up from Cam Young, thought experiment. Hypothetically, if the Jazz only traded one of Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert in 22, which team would have been better? And then he lists the roster basically. I saw this before I came in for the podcast, and I sort of laid it out a little bit because I thought it was a really interesting question. So, with both of these teams, you will have the same players in Conley, Bogdanovich, Clarkson, Ingles, O'Neal, right? Adding to those players, if you only trade Donovan Mitchell, would be Sexton, Markkanen, and Ochai Agbaji.
Yep.
And then in only the Gobert trade, it'll be, again, those same players, and then adding Kessler, Beasley, and Vanderbilt. Which team do you like more there?
These are both really good what-ifs in Jazz
Yes.
history, and the truth is they maybe should have done one.
Yeah.
And not both at the same time. And maybe they should have auditioned that and then seen what Will Hardy, who's proven to be a really good coach, could do. I get why when they pulled the plug, they said, let's not do a really slow rebuild. And they thought they were going to be awful with a chance to get Victor Wembanyama. And then they went 12-3 to start the year, and those plans were dashed really quickly. That hurt. That was really a painful, in retrospect, kind of kink in the rebuild for the Utah Jazz and how they were going to get back to this team back to promised land. But probably doing the Gobert trade is the right way to do it.
Okay.
You look, Donovan is a top 10 player in the NBA right now.
Yep.
He was already on your roster. He was young. He did re-sign in Cleveland. I don't know if he ever would have re-signed in Utah, is the problem. But if you're just looking at the actual better roster, I think that might have been the better roster because you end up with Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell, Bojan Bogdanovich, Jordan Clarkson, Joe Ingles, guard heavy.
Yeah.
Royce O'Neal, but you get Walker Kessler in that mix, and then you get all the draft picks. And it's more that you get Walker and all the draft picks, and then you can start to tinker around it.
Yes.
But, Bojan was a really good player. Donovan's good. You hope that Kessler keeps your defense somewhat afloat, and then you use your 3 draft picks to build around it. The Gobert trade, or if you keep Gobert, and you switch out Mitchell, and then you have Colin Sexton, who's very good. With Rudy Gobert, you still kind of have your front court, back court thing. And then Lowry, who steps in as your kind of ideal 3. He's probably a little bit repetitive with Bojan, but that's a dangerous front line of Bojan, Lowry, and Rudy. And then a potent back court with a Joe Ingles and a Colin Sexton, or a Colin Sexton and a Jordan Clarkson. They're both probably better.
Yeah.
Those might have been better options. The Jazz might have made a mistake trading both of them.
Personally, I think that just in terms of talent, only trading Mitchell would be the better team. But I think I like the fit of the only trading Gobert team. And then, like you said, you have all of the picks that you got.
4 draft picks going forward to mess around with and play around with and figure out, how to build a team around Donovan relatively quickly. Like at that trade deadline that year, Walker's already better than you think. Donovan's still good. He has something to prove. Mike was really good that year. You go out and you trade Bojan or Jordan or Joe and draft picks or Beasley and Vanderbilt. How good does Jared Vanderbilt look next to Donovan Mitchell and Walker Kessler and Bojan Bogdanovich? Like, that's a really good fit there. He plays well. I know he's been hurt, but yeah, it's a tough what if.
Yeah.
Because then you have all your draft capital you've recaptured all your draft capital. You could do convenient things like trading all your future picks for one future unprotected pick for extra draft capital like the Suns did this year, and like you've got a full chest of assets again to rebuild stuff. Like, they made a very deep cut into the roster to get to the bottom, and they never got to the bottom until this year.
Yep.
So in retrospect, that was difficult. I understand why they did it. I wonder if you got some truth serum in them if they wish they did one and not the other.
Yeah. Last question here from Jazz Time Jones. Who do you like in the draft at that 20s range with the Minnesota pick?
Again, I have not really done a deep dive into what the draft looks like. Certainly not outside of the top 3 or 4. I've watched all those guys quite a bit already, but not really a deep dive beyond that. I think it gets more interesting in talking about like the strategy of what the Jazz are going to do there, which the Jazz went into the year, with my understanding, talking to some people, like the idea was like, let's see who the 3 guys they drafted last year, which are Bryce, Taylor, and Keontae, and then the 3 guys they drafted this year, Flip, Isaiah, and Cody. See who can really play, see who can't play, and who needs to be replaced with the 3 guys coming in this year's draft. Well, they already ditched one of those picks in the Suns trade that we talked about for the future unprotected first. And then Cody's hardly played, and Taylor didn't play at all because he got hurt. So next year, they're not giving up on Cody, I don't think.
Yeah.
So next year, it becomes a huge year for Cody. It becomes an equally huge year for Taylor. that's basically 2 rookies.
Mm-hmm.
Or, it's like the 47th game of Taylor Hendricks' career. Like, he hasn't played very much basketball, and Cody's going to be in the same boat. It'll be like his 50th game, 60th game. So I think that might be what the year is about, plus the guy you're drafting in the top 5.
Yep.
So, like, 20 is a disaster. Just the fact that, like, you have him on your roster stinks.
Yeah.
So I'm probably taking a draft and stash guy, or I'm trading it.
Yeah.
Like, so if that's the case, I'm looking at, like, Hugo Gonzalez, which, have you seen him? No one's seen him. He plays overseas. Traore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who was the other guy who's was kind of projected to be a top 5 pick originally and has fallen down mock drafts. I might take a guy and just hope they don't come over.
Yeah.
And that just might be the approach. Nolan Traore is the point guard from France. And then, like I mentioned, Hugo Gonzalez plays for Real Madrid. Guys don't do draft and stash so much anymore, but you might see if you can convince them.
Yeah. I was going to say, with taking all, like, 2 years ago, like, a lot of people even said then, no way the Jazz take all 3 picks. They did. And then coming into last year's draft, they're like, absolutely no way they take all 3 picks. And then they had someone they really liked at each spot, so they did it again.
Yeah.
I'm not saying any of that was the wrong decision. You have a lot of guys to pick between. And, of course, the goal was to never go 6 for 6. You're just throwing as many darts as you can, hoping to get a bullseye.
Exactly right.
So now they, even though, like you said, I don't think there's a problem with that, but now they're sort of back against the wall. Like, you can't keep selecting with these picks.
Sergio Delaria. I mean, I honestly just pulled up Tankathon, and it's like, he plays in Spain. It's like probably that guy.
Yeah.
And then the other part is they have Gabriel Procida, who is overseas, who, like, they kind of like, is my understanding, and might come over at some point as well. Like, that's another rookie waiting in the wings, and maybe you just wait on him forever or it never materializes. Like, whatever. You got Flip out of the Simone Fontecchio trade. I think you already feel pretty good about that, but you don't waste assets.
Yeah.
So maybe you just trade this pick, and maybe you just say, hey, we're confident with the top 5 guy. If that's where you end up, you think those guys are going to be good. They're going to get a lot of minutes next year, and you just move forward with that. But it's just so many young guys suddenly that it's hard to play them all. And if you do make the pick, maybe you go with Janai Broom from Auburn, who's going to win National Player of the Year. It's he and Cooper Flagg are going to be Player of the Year. Like, it would be a very Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck thing to do, to be like, we got Cooper Flagg and Janai Broom. We got the 2 best players in college basketball last year, and be like, yes, one of them's 23, but he doesn't need 5 years to develop. Now, he's not going to be an awesome NBA player, which is why he's going to be drafted in the second half of the first round, but he is what he is. And, like, you're confident he's a 2-way forward who has shown he can play at, like, the highest levels. The same way I think the Jazz were probably going to draft Zach Edey if he fell to 10.
Yeah.
And just be like, we know what he is.
Yep.
It saves us the trouble of, like, quote-unquote full-on dedicated development. He's just going to be who he is. So I could also see something like that. But my guess is the first thought would be draft and stash on a kind of a high upside guy.
Yeah. And going with that, like you said, selecting him at 20, it's sort of like you could even sort of play it how the Heat did with Jaime Jaquez, right?
Yeah, right?
Like, you draft the most NBA-ready guy. So many NBA teams were super high on Jaime Jaquez in his rookie year. And, like, I feel like for a lot of those guys, I don't have much to back this up, but I feel like they'll come in and that'll be maybe around how good they'll be, like, for a long time. Of course, they can always improve. It's their first year in the NBA. But you could trade him. Like,
Malcolm Brogdon is a really good example of this, right? He comes in, he's a second-round pick, he wins Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
He's, like, never gotten better.
Yeah.
He's a little better, but he's not, like, people are like, this guy's going to be an all-star. No, he was just much better than everybody the day he got to the NBA.
Yes.
And then he maintained asset value.
Yep.
And he got traded really quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could do that same type of thing, yes, with a guy who steps in and is ready to play. And if he's hits and he's way better than you think, great. And if he's just good, you can still trade him because he's a young guy like Jaime Jaquez would have had a ton of value at the trade deadline this year. Real chance they just traded on draft night.
True.
Real chance there's a team like Boston who's like, we're going to have to lose some players off our salary. This guy fell. We like him. He can step in and play right away on a $2 million contract. And that's how we're going to keep our championship window open. That's probably more likely what happens, but the truth is you just draft the best player available. Yeah. And you should never waver off that regardless of how many young guys are on your team, but human nature doesn't really allow for that. So it's interesting. That's a really interesting pick. I think getting off of the other late first, which was going to be 29 or 30, it's going to the Suns right now, was really smart.
Yes.
You do no need to have that pick at all. You didn't need that pick. You didn't need to add 3 more rookies. In fact, you've got 2 second-round picks that you added already this year that are probably going to get sold or traded. So they've got a lot. They just got too many young players.
Yeah.
So good question, though.
I think that's it.
All right, that's it. Let me check Blue Sky really quickly, see if anyone responded. Yeah. Oh, two from Alex.
Okay.
So we'll read these really quickly. Alex, how would you guess the Jazz's upcoming offseason would look if they picked either first, second, or third this year? I feel like the different players would change the direction drastically. For example, if they get Flagg, you'd keep Lowry, but if you get Bailey, Lowry feels redundant. I do think there are probably some redundancies between Ace Bailey and Lowry Markkanen. I don't know if your offseason plan should change dramatically based on who you draft, barring like falling to 6.
Yes.
If you fall to 6, yes, you probably hold on to everyone. If you get number 1, I think everything goes back to the drawing board.
Definitely.
Of just like, how do they fit around Cooper Flagg, or how do they fit around Dylan Harper? And even then, making that decision in their first year, like, can you imagine if the Trailblazers had been like, we got Scoot. Now let's change everything we have to build around Scoot Henderson. And then he had that rookie season. Now Scoot's coming around, and maybe, he ends up being the player we hoped in the first place, but you just don't know until they actually get on the floor.
Yeah.
Even Cooper Flagg, like, there's still some bust factor there. It's really low, but you just never know.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it would just be jumping the gun if you formulate your roster. Like, if I'm not wrong, the Cavs drafted LeBron in 2003, and then they started making moves after his rookie season in 2004.
Yeah, because Darius Miles was like, you're on Darius Miles' team now. And he was wrong.
Yeah.
You were on LeBron's team. But yeah, right. Yeah, no, you don't get too hasty with that. And you see who fits. Like, yeah, maybe Taylor can't play next to Cooper Flagg at all because, like, those guys don't create enough. So you got to move off of Taylor Hendricks. Or maybe he's the perfect fit because Cooper's playmaking really explodes at the NBA level with better spacing, and then exactly what you want is a guy who never dribbles but is a great defensive player to team next to him and who just sits out there and shoot threes, and it's like, oh man, that's the perfect player. And then Lowry becomes redundant.
Yep.
Or you need John Collins because Cooper's an okay three-point shooter but not great, but you need those guys, or Lowry. So you just don't know until you know. Yep. I don't think this season necessarily changes a whole lot. But maybe if they're just like, well, you want to get AJ DeBonsa the year after that, or Cooper Flagg, and once you land your number 1 guy, everyone's going to be excited. It buys you a bunch of time. Really hit rock bottom with your rebuild. People are going to buy season tickets to see Cooper play, and then you win 28 games next year, or 21 games again next year, and you get another top 5 pick. Alex has one more question. Lots of fans have grumbled about Isaiah Collier's shooting stats, but I think it's interesting that they're pretty comparable to Stockton's as a rookie. Obviously different eras, and I'm not saying he's going to be a Hall of Famer, but how excited should we be about him? Moderately.
Yes.
He's great. He's the best story to come out of the Jazz season amongst the young players.
Yeah.
I'm going to take Walker out of the young player conversation. Walker might be the Jazz's best player. John Collins is in that conversation too. Has been a great story. Lowry's just kind of been up and down this year, so whatever. I'm not worried about Lowry long term by any means. But yeah, Collier's looks like the first young player the Jazz have that you're like, oh, I could see him being on the team in 5 years and still being like a really key piece. And, we've talked about like the Tony Parker comp. We've talked about some of the other names that maybe he could turn into. Again, those are Hall of Famers we're talking about. But like, can you be a top 15 point guard in the NBA? If you are, you're probably worth keeping around.
Yeah.
And Isaiah Collier, I think, kind of has that top 15 potential in the league. And if he starts to shoot, he has top 10 point guard potential because he does a lot really well.
I could even see him just being like always a top 5 sort of playmaker in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Never really in like the all-star conversation, but just like a guy that you would love to have on your team, whether he's a starter or a backup. The first name that came to my mind, and I'm looking at some stats before I say something stupid, but sort of like Ty Lawson, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
You know what? Like something
for
like
sure.
that. Like he was really good for those Denver teams for a long time, and okay, I wanted to say he was a one-time All-Star, but I guess he did not. But just like in that sort
Great.
of category.
Yeah, fine. Don't be an all-star.
Yeah.
Tyus Jones.
Yep.
Like, now here's the problem. Like, if Isaiah Collier's Tyus Jones, like Tyus Jones makes $2 million a year. Like, he was widely available.
Yeah.
Jazz probably could have tricked him into signing here if they just wanted to give him more money and tried to trade him at the trade deadline. He thought he was going to go play for a winner. Unfortunately, he chose the Phoenix Suns. That was his bad. But yeah, like, can he be better than Tyus Jones? That's probably a pretty good player.
Yeah.
I am tending to bet on his shooting.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think his confidence is certainly there to shoot. Like, there are guys who are like, he's a non-shooter, and you get him like, he doesn't shoot. Non-shooter doesn't mean they don't go in. It means he doesn't try them.
Yeah.
He never tries to shoot threes. Ricky Rubio rarely tried to shoot threes. Chris Dunn shot 40%. I know we got into an argument with a guy on Twitter last year. He's like, no, Chris Dunn is a three-point shooter because he shoots 40% from three. It's like they don't guard him.
Yeah.
So he's not a three-point shooter. He can make them sometimes. The trick is Isaiah has to be good enough that you have to guard him, and he makes them enough that it actually helps the team. So it's got to be like 35% on 4 attempts.
Yep.
I think is like a really good sweet spot for him. And I bet he could get there. That means one night he shoots 2 of 4 and one night he shoots 1 of 4. I think that's probably somewhat realistic for him.
Yep.
I think we could see that absolutely for Isaiah Collier. So I bet on his shooting. I think the personality stuff is good. I think the leadership stuff is really good, and the playmaking's elite. So, and I think he's going to be competitive enough to be a solid defender, despite the fact that he has good size, not great size. All right, I think that's all we have. Awesome. Appreciate everyone who sent in mailbag questions as always. Again, I apologize for sending it out on Blue Sky a little bit late, but everyone who follows us on Twitter, at Ben's Hoops, at Holt Sports. I'll be back again Monday, going solo. Chandler's got some time off, so go get your rest if that's what you're doing. Excited for that, but yes, we will be recording again coming up on Monday. More Jazz Notes. Stick around.